While I was fighting for my life in the hospital, my husband Matthew was taking selfies at the Eiffel Tower with his mistress. His text read, "Working late tonight, don't wait up." But what he didn't know was that I'd already changed all the locks, emptied our accounts, and left divorce papers on the kitchen table waiting for his return. The antiseptic smell of the hospital room had become familiar over the past 3 weeks. Monitors beeped steadily beside me, tracking the vital signs that doctors had worried might slip away after my emergency surgery. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The harsh fluorescent lights cast an unnatural glow across the stark white sheets as I stared at my phone, my hands trembling not from weakness, but from a rage that burned through the fog of painkillers. On my screen was an Instagram post that Matthew had accidentally shared to his main account instead of his private one. There he stood, arm wrapped around a woman I'd never seen before, both of them smiling widely with the Eiffel Tower glittering behind them in the twilight. The caption read, "New beginnings with this amazing woman. Paris. Love. Fresh start. New beginnings." While I lay here with a 30-centimeter incision across my abdomen, fighting a post-surgical infection that could have taken my life, my husband of 11 years was starting fresh with another woman. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 weeks ago, I had been rushing to prepare for an important presentation at work when the pain hit. Sharp, blinding, and relentless. I'd called Matthew 5 times before finally dialing 911 myself. By the time the paramedics arrived, I was barely conscious on our kitchen floor. Ruptured appendix, the doctors later explained. The infection had spread. I was lucky to be alive. Matthew had been there for the first surgery, of course. Had held my hand and told me everything would be fine. But as the days turned into weeks, his visits became shorter. "Work is crazy," he'd explain, eyes never quite meeting mine. "The Johnson account is taking up all my time. I'll come by tomorrow, promise." The Johnson account. I almost laughed now, a bitter sound that caught in my throat and turned into a cough. There was no Johnson account. I'd called his office yesterday when he didn't answer his cell, only to have his assistant tell me he'd taken a week of personal leave. For his trip to Europe, she'd added, confusion evident in her voice. "Didn't he tell you?" No, he hadn't told me. Just as he hadn't told me about the woman in the photo, whose profile I was now scrolling through with numb detachment. Brianna Walker, interior designer, 29 years old, 11 years younger than me. Her page was filled with artful shots of expensive restaurants, yoga poses on exotic beaches, and, more recently, glimpses of Paris. In several of the photos, I could see a man's hand, his watch, Matthew's watch, the one I'd given him for our 10th anniversary. How long had it been going on? Looking back, I could see the signs I'd missed or chosen to ignore. The late nights, the weekend golf trips, the sudden password changes on his phone, the way he'd angled his laptop screen away from me when I entered a room. I set the phone down and closed my eyes, feeling the hot sting of tears threatening to spill. But I refused to cry. Not for him. Not anymore. "Christina?" Dr. Patel's voice pulled me back to the present. She stood at the foot of my bed, clipboard in hand. Concern etched across her features. "How are you feeling today?" "Like my husband is cheating on me in Paris while I'm stuck here fighting an infection," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. Dr. Patel blinked, momentarily thrown by my candor before her professional demeanor returned. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said simply. "Your lab results show improvement, though. The antibiotics are working. If things continue this way, we might be able to discharge you in a few days." A few days. Just enough time. "Thank you," I said, attempting a smile. "That's the best news I've heard all week." After Dr. Patel left, I reached for my phone again, but not to torture myself with more photos of Matthew and Brianna living it up in the city of light. Instead, I opened my contacts and called the one person I knew I could count on. Julie? It's me. I need your help with something. Julie had been my best friend since college. She'd never liked Matthew, had seen through his charm to the selfishness beneath. I should have listened to her years ago. Christina? What's wrong? Are you okay? The concern in her voice made my throat tighten. Matthew's in Paris, I said flatly. With another woman. The silence on the other end lasted only a moment before Julie unleashed a string of creative expletives that would have made a sailor blush. When she finally paused for breath, I continued. I need to get some things in motion before he gets back. I can't do it from here, obviously. Name it, Julie said immediately. Whatever you need, I'm there. I took a deep breath. The plan that had been forming in my mind since seeing that Instagram post crystallized into clear, decisive steps. First, I need you to go to my house. In my home office, bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, there's a folder with all our financial information. Accounts, passwords, everything. I heard rustling as Julie grabbed a pen. Got it. What else? I need a locksmith. Today, if possible. I want every lock in the house changed. Done. And I need you to call Sienna. Julie paused. Your lawyer friend, from the charity board? Yes. Tell her. Tell her I need divorce papers drawn up. She'll know what to do. For the first time since waking up in this hospital bed 3 weeks ago, I felt a sense of control returning. Matthew had made his choice, thinking I was too weak, too distracted by my health crisis to notice. He'd underestimated me. They always did. As Julie promised to take care of everything, I found myself staring out the window at the city skyline. The sun was setting, bathing everything in a golden glow that seemed to promise new beginnings. Not for Matthew and his Parisian romance, but for me. One more thing, I added before hanging up. Check the safe in our bedroom. Password is 1129. There's cash and some jewelry that belonged to my grandmother. I want that secured. Consider it done, Julie replied with fierce loyalty. He's not getting a damn thing. After we hung up, I sank back against the pillows, exhaustion washing over me. The anger was still there, burning steadily, but alongside it was something else now. Determination. Matthew thought he had it all. Figured out. Paris with his young girlfriend while his inconveniently ill wife languished in a hospital bed. But I've always been a planner, and while he was taking selfies at the Eiffel Tower, I was orchestrating his homecoming surprise. One that would ensure when he returned from his romantic getaway, he'd find more than just changed locks waiting for him. The morning sunlight once streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Riverside Drive apartment, casting golden rectangles across the hardwood floors Matthew and I had picked out together. 7 years ago, we'd spent an entire weekend deliberating between Brazilian cherry and oak, eventually settling on the latter because Matthew said it would age more. Gracefully, the irony of that statement wasn't lost on me now. Before the hospital, before Paris, before Brianna, there had been lazy Sunday mornings with coffee in oversized mugs, the New York Times spread across our kitchen island, and Matthew's hand absent-mindedly playing with my hair as we debated which exhibits to visit or which restaurant to try for dinner. We'd been that couple, successful, enviable, seemingly perfect. I'd met Matthew 12 years ago at a charity gala for the museum where I worked as a curator of contemporary art. He'd approached me during the silent auction, champagne flute in hand, and pointed to a painting I'd been admiring. "Beautiful piece," he'd said. "Are you bidding?" I'd laughed and gestured to my modest curator's salary. "Not on what I make." "That's a shame," he replied. "Your eyes lit up when you looked at it." 2 hours later, he'd won the painting in the auction and promptly handed me the claim ticket. "It belongs with someone who truly appreciates it," he'd said. The painting, an abstract study in blues and greens, still hung in our living room. I wondered now if he'd ask for it back, or if Brianna would want it in whatever new space they created together. Our courtship had been a whirlwind. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Matthew, the rising star at his investment firm, swept me into a world of black tie events, weekend getaways to Martha's Vineyard, and intimate dinners at restaurants where the chef would come to our table to greet him personally. I'd been dazzled, not just by the lifestyle, but by his confidence, his ambition, his unwavering belief that the world was his for the taking. We were married within a year, a lavish ceremony at the Botanical Gardens that was featured in a wedding magazine. My parents, retired teachers who had scrimped and saved to put me through art school, seemed overwhelmed by it all. The extravagance, the notable guests, the obvious wealth. My father had pulled me aside during the reception, his brow furrowed, with concern. "Are you sure about this, Christina? It's all happening so fast." I dismissed his worries with the confidence of someone who believed she'd found her perfect match. "He makes me happy, Dad. He challenges me to dream bigger." The early years of our marriage had lived up to that dream. We traveled extensively. Matthew, for business, me tagging along to visit museums and galleries around the world. When I was offered the position of senior curator at the museum, Matthew had arranged a surprise celebration, flying in friends from across the country. He'd supported my career, proud to have a wife who was respected in her field. Or so I'd thought. Looking back, I could see the subtle shifts, how his support had always come with suggestions, ways I could be more strategic, more ambitious, more like him. How he'd begun to refer to my work as Christina's Little Museum, job when speaking to his colleagues. How he'd started to schedule dinners with important clients on the nights of my exhibition openings. There was the night, 3 years ago, when I'd returned home buzzing with excitement over securing a controversial installation by an important feminist artist, only to have Matthew ask if I really wanted to waste gallery space on something so niche. When I'd tried to explain the artist's significance, he'd cut me off with a kiss on the forehead and a dismissive, "If it makes you happy, sweetheart." Still, we'd had good times. Weekends at our house in the Berkshires, the trip to Japan for our 5th anniversary. The way he'd hold my hand during turbulence on flights because he knew I was terrified of flying. The care package he'd sent to my office when I was working late nights preparing for a major exhibition, filled with my favorite snacks, a cashmere wrap because the museum gets cold at night, and a handwritten note saying he was proud of me. Had it all been an act? Or had something changed along the way? I thought about the subtle signs I'd missed. The growing frequency of his business trips, the new clothes, the sudden interest in fitness that had him joining an upscale gym near his office, the texts that would make him smile in a way he hadn't smiled at me in years. 2 months ago, we'd attended a dinner party at his colleague Robert's house. I'd watched Matthew across the room, charming as always, commanding attention as he described the international expansion his firm was planning. I'd felt a familiar pride, mingled with something else, a growing distance, as though I was watching a performance rather than my husband being himself. Later that night, as Robert's wife Sienna showed me their newly renovated kitchen, she'd mentioned running into Matthew at a restaurant downtown. The place with the famous tableside martini service, she'd clarified. Gary and I were there for our anniversary. I waved, but Matthew seemed deep in conversation with his client. I'd nodded and smiled, not mentioning that Matthew had told me he was having dinner with his brother that night. A business dinner wasn't a crime, after all. Except Matthew didn't have any clients who were slender brunettes in their late 20s. Not that I knew of, anyway. I'd buried the inconsistency, added it to the growing pile of moments that didn't quite add up, but that I chose not to examine too closely. Our life looked perfect from the outside. The successful investment banker and his curator wife, the tasteful apartment, the vacation home, the enviable social circle. I'd invested over a decade in building that life. Walking away meant admitting failure, and failure wasn't in my vocabulary until now. Until a ruptured appendix had landed me in the hospital and exposed the rupture in my marriage that had probably been there all along. Julie arrived at the hospital the next morning, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd been up all night, executing my plans. "It's done," she said, sinking into the chair beside my bed. "Locks changed, financial documents secured, and Sienna is drafting the papers. She said to tell you she's making sure he doesn't get a penny more than he's legally entitled to. Which isn't much, given what she's found." "What do you mean, what she's found?" I asked, pushing myself up against the pillows. Julie hesitated. "Maybe we should wait until you're stronger." "Tell me now," I insisted. She sighed, reaching for my hand. "There are inconsistencies in your joint finances. Large withdrawals over the past 6 months, a lease on an apartment in Tribeca under his name only, and charges for a diamond pendant from Tiffany that I'm fairly certain you don't own." I closed my eyes briefly, absorbing this new betrayal on top of everything else. When I opened them again, my resolve had only strengthened. "Thank you for doing this, Jules." She squeezed my hand. "What are best friends for, if not helping you leave your cheating husband while you're recovering from near-fatal surgery?" Despite everything, I found myself smiling. With Matthew, I'd gained a lifestyle but lost parts of myself along the way. With Julie's unwavering support, I was already beginning to find those pieces again. The signs had been there for months, like small cracks in a carefully painted facade. I simply hadn't wanted to see them. "Last Christmas, Matthew had given me a pair of sapphire earrings to match your eyes," he'd said. "I'd worn them to every important event since, including the museum's annual fundraiser in February. During the cocktail hour, Gary, Robert's business partner, had approached with his wife. "Christina, always a pleasure," Gary had said, kissing my cheek. His gaze had lingered on my earrings. "Beautiful. Matthew has excellent taste." "Thank you," I'd replied. "Christmas gift." A flicker of confusion had crossed Gary's face. I could have sworn I saw similar ones on his assistant last week at the office party. Must be a coincidence. I'd laughed it off. Matthew's assistant, a competent woman in her 50s named Diane, wasn't the type to wear statement jewelry. Besides, Matthew would never be so careless as to give his wife and another woman identical gifts. Later, reviewing the event photos for the museum's website, I noticed Matthew deep in conversation with a young woman I didn't recognize. His hand rested lightly at the small of her back, his head bent toward hers in a posture of intimate conversation. When I asked who she was, he'd dismissed the question. "Some donor's daughter. Development department asked me to make her feel welcome." I'd accepted the explanation without question. Matthew often charmed potential donors on the museum's behalf, leveraging his business connections to help my career. It was one of the things I'd loved about him, his willingness to support my work. Then there was the weekend in March when he claimed to be at a financial conference in Chicago. I'd called the hotel to have champagne sent to his room as a surprise. We'd just received news that the museum had secured funding for my proposal to bring a major international exhibition to New York, largely thanks to Matthew's connections with the primary sponsor. "I'm sorry, we don't have a guest registered under that name," the concierge had informed me. When I'd mentioned it to Matthew upon his return, he'd explained that the firm had switched hotels at the last minute due to overbooking issues. His answer came too quickly, too smoothly, but I'd accepted it because the alternative meant questioning everything. The most glaring sign had come just 6 weeks before my emergency surgery. I'd been using Matthew's laptop to order takeout because mine was updating. A notification had popped up, a text message from B appearing in the corner of the screen through his synced iPhone. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Wear that blue shirt I love." I'd stared at the message, my finger hovering over the notification, torn between invasion of privacy and the gnawing suspicion that something wasn't right. Before I could decide, Matthew had returned from his shower and gently closed the laptop. "Found." "What'd you need?" he'd asked, a slight edge to his voice. "Just ordering Thai," I'd replied, studying his face for signs of guilt or concern. But Matthew's expression had remained neutral, practiced. The next day, he'd left for a client meeting, wearing a crisp blue shirt I didn't recognize. When he returned that evening with the faint scent of an unfamiliar perfume clinging to his collar, I'd told myself it was from sitting in a restaurant near someone wearing too much fragrance. The lies we tell ourselves are often more elaborate than the ones others tell us. There had been other moments, calls that he took in another room, weekends cut short due to work emergencies, the growing emotional distance as he retreated into his phone rather than engaging in conversation over dinner. Each incident on its own could be explained away, but together they formed a pattern I had willfully ignored. Even the timing of my promotion to museum director had coincided with Matthew's increased absences. What should have been a period of shared celebration instead became marked by his convenient business trips and late nights at the office. I'd assumed he was working hard to match my career advancement, never considering he might be pulling away precisely because of it. The night before my emergency surgery had been the last normal evening we'd spent together, though normal had become a relative term. I'd been working late at the museum, finalizing details for an upcoming exhibition. Matthew had texted that he would handle dinner, a rare offer that had once been commonplace. When I arrived home, exhausted but grateful, I found takeout from my favorite Italian restaurant plated elegantly at our dining table. Matthew had opened a bottle of wine and was setting out silverware wrapped in cloth napkins. "What's the occasion?" I'd asked, dropping my bag and slipping off my heels. "Can't a man do something nice for his wife?" he'd replied, pulling out my chair. Looking back, it seemed less like thoughtfulness and more like preemptive guilt. Had he already planned his Paris getaway with Brianna? Was this dinner his way of balancing some cosmic ledger before betraying me? Over pasta and wine, he'd asked about my exhibition preparations, nodding at appropriate moments but checking his phone whenever it buzzed. When I mentioned potentially traveling to Berlin in the fall for an art fair, his response had been strangely enthusiastic. "You should absolutely go, Christina. Take your time there. See everything." At the time, I'd been touched by his support. Now I wondered if he'd been mentally calculating the freedom my absence would provide. We'd gone to bed that night with the comfortable distance that had become our norm. Matthew on his side, engrossed in emails, me with a catalog for the upcoming exhibition. No goodnight kiss, no meaningful conversation, just two people occupying the same space without truly connecting. The next morning, my body had made the decision my mind refused to acknowledge, that something was fundamentally broken. As I'd collapsed on the kitchen floor, pain radiating through my abdomen, my last clear thought before the paramedics arrived wasn't of Matthew or our marriage, but of the exhibition I might not live to see completed. "You're lucky," Dr. Patel had told me after the emergency surgery. "Another few hours and the infection could have been fatal." Lucky. The word seemed absurd now. The hospital room door opened, pulling me from my thoughts. Julie entered carrying a small duffel bag. "Fresh clothes, your favorite moisturizer, and contraband chocolate," she announced, setting the bag beside my bed. "Any word from the doctors?" "They're reducing the antibiotics tomorrow," I said. "If my blood work improves, I could be discharged by Thursday." Julie nodded, her expression serious. "That's good timing. According to his itinerary, which I found in his email after you gave me his password, Matthew returns from Paris on Friday evening." I absorbed this information, mentally calculating how much time I had to finalize my plans. "Did you find anything else in his email?" Julie's hesitation told me everything. "Are you sure you want to know this now?" "I need to know what I'm dealing with," she sighed, pulling up a chair. "Their relationship has been going on for at least 8 months, based on the emails. She's an interior designer he met when he was looking into renovating your vacation home. Apparently as a surprise for you?" The irony in her voice was thick. There's an apartment in Tribeca. The lease started 3 months ago. 8 months. While I'd been working 14-hour days to prepare for the biggest exhibition of my career, Matthew had been building a parallel life with another woman. There's something else, Julie continued reluctantly. He's been moving money from your joint investment accounts into a separate one. Not huge amounts at once, but it adds up to nearly $200,000 over the past year. I closed my eyes, feeling an odd sense of calm descend. This wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated exit strategy. Matthew hadn't just betrayed our marriage, he'd been systematically dismantling our life together while pretending everything was normal. Sienna needs to know about this, I said finally, opening my eyes. It changes the divorce strategy. Julie nodded, already typing on her phone. I'll tell her now. As she stepped out to make the call, I stared at the ceiling, connecting the dots that had been there all along. The signs, the lies, the distance. The truth had been writing itself across our marriage for months, and I'd refused to read it until now. But I was reading it clearly now, and I was ready to write the final chapter myself. The moment that shattered any remaining illusions came unexpectedly, 3 days after discovering Matthew's Instagram slip-up. I was half dozing in my hospital bed, the afternoon sun filtering through the blinds, when my phone chimed with an email notification. I almost ignored it, assuming it was work-related. The museum staff had been sending regular updates despite my insistence that I needed to focus on recovery. But the sender's name caught my eye. Brianna Walker. My heart lurched painfully as I unlocked my phone. The subject line read simply, "I think you should know." For several seconds, I just stared at the unopened message, my finger hovering over the screen. Whatever this woman had to say would irrevocably change things. Once I opened this email, there would be no pretending, no more elaborate explanations I could construct to preserve the fiction of my marriage. Finally, I tapped it open. Christina, you don't know me, but I've known about you for almost a year. Matthew told me your marriage was over in all but paperwork, that you were both staying together for appearances and financial reasons until the right time to announce your separation. I believed him until yesterday, when a colleague mentioned seeing on social media that you're in the hospital. Matthew told me you were at an art retreat in Arizona. I'm not writing to apologize. I honestly thought I was dating a separated man. But I can't continue being part of a lie. You deserve to know the truth, especially now. We've been seeing each other since last September. In January, he began looking for an apartment for us. Last month, he added my name to the lease. We're supposed to move in together when we return from Paris. I've attached screenshots of some conversations that confirm the timeline. I'm not doing this to hurt you, but because if our situations were reversed, I would want someone to tell me the truth. Brianna. Beneath were images, text exchanges, emails, photographs, each more damning than the last. Matthew and Brianna at a restaurant I recognized. We had celebrated our anniversary there 2 years ago. Matthew standing in what appeared to be a newly leased apartment, champagne flute in hand. A text exchange where he assured her that C doesn't suspect anything, and once everything is in place, we can be together officially. The most recent screenshot was a conversation from just yesterday. Brianna. Should we check in on Christina? If she's really in the hospital? Matthew. The hospital called. She's fine. Routine procedure. Nothing serious. Let's enjoy our last night in Paris. Brianna. Are you sure? Maybe we should cut the trip short. Matthew. Trust me. She'd be annoyed if we interrupted our business trip for something minor. That's how she is. Something minor. A ruptured appendix and systemic infection that could have killed me. That's how she is. As if my near-death experience was simply another example of my supposedly difficult personality. The phone slipped from my fingers onto the blanket. I felt strangely weightless, as though I might float away from the hospital bed entirely. This wasn't just an affair or a midlife crisis. This was methodical deception on a scale I couldn't have imagined. Matthew hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He'd constructed an elaborate alternate reality and sold it to both Brianna and me. The door to my room opened, and Dr. Patel entered with her usual clipboard and gentle smile. "Good news, Christina. Your latest blood work shows significant improvement. If this continues..." She paused, noticing my expression. "Are you all right? Are you in pain?" "No," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "At least not the kind you can treat." Dr. Patel set down her clipboard and approached the bed, her professional demeanor softening. "Do you want to talk about it? Or would you prefer I call someone?" I shook my head, then reached for my phone again, navigating to the hospital's website. "You offer counseling services for patients, don't you?" "We do," she confirmed. "We have several excellent therapists on staff. I'd like to speak with someone. Today, if possible." Dr. Patel nodded. "I'll arrange it right away." She hesitated, before adding, "Whatever you're going through, Christina, please remember that your physical recovery depends partly on your emotional well-being. Don't let anything compromise the progress you've made." After she left, I forwarded Brianna's email to Julie and Sienna with a simple message. "Now we have everything we need." Then I blocked both Matthew's and Brianna's numbers and email addresses. The hospital therapist, a compassionate woman named Dr. Tanner, arrived an hour later. I told her everything: the discovery of the affair, Matthew's absence during my medical crisis, the detailed evidence of his betrayal. "It sounds like you're experiencing a profound betrayal trauma," she said when I finally fell silent. "The foundation of trust you built your life upon has been completely undermined." "I keep thinking I should have seen it sooner," I admitted. "The signs were there. We often don't see what we're not looking for," Dr. Tanner replied. "And from what you've told me, your husband went to extraordinary lengths to maintain his deception." "What happens now?" I asked. "How do I trailed off, unsure how to articulate the enormity of rebuilding a life I no longer recognized. "Now you focus on healing, physically and emotionally," she said. "You've already taken important steps by securing your finances and consulting a lawyer. Those practical matters matter, but so does your well-being. I feel..." I searched for the right word. "Hollow. Like there's nothing left inside." "That's a normal response to this kind of trauma," Dr. Tanner assured me. "But that hollow space? It will fill again, with your own identity, your own dreams, separate from him. The person you were before him is still there, Christina, along with the stronger person you're becoming now." After our session, I lay back against the pillows, emotionally exhausted but clearer than I'd felt in days. The shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by a strange, calm certainty. Matthew had made his choice long ago. Now I was making mine. Julie arrived that evening, taking one look at my face before asking, "What happened?" I motioned to my phone. "His girlfriend emailed me. Apparently, she just discovered I'm not on an art retreat in Arizona." Julie's expression darkened as she read through the email and attachments. "That absolute bastard," she muttered. "At least she had the decency to tell you the truth." "She thought she was dating a separated man," I said, surprising myself with the lack of anger I felt toward Brianna. "She's another person he lied to." "Are you defending her?" "No, but my issue isn't with her. It's with my husband, who apparently told her our marriage was over while telling me he was working late." Julie set the phone down and took my hand. "Sienna called me earlier. The divorce papers will be ready tomorrow. She's also filing for an emergency court order to freeze the remaining joint assets based on his pattern of moving funds. If the judge grants it, he won't be able to touch anything else." "Good." The word came out stronger than I expected. "What about the locks?" "Changed yesterday." I also packed up his personal items. Not everything, just enough to make a point. They're in boxes in the garage. I left his prized vinyl collection and those first edition books he's so proud of on display, though. Figured you might need some bargaining chips. For the first time in days, I felt the corners of my mouth twitch upward. You've thought of everything. Not everything, Julie admitted. I did change the alarm code and the Wi-Fi password, though. And I may have told the doorman that Matthew is not to be admitted without your explicit permission. Thank you, I said, meaning it more deeply than the simple words could convey. For all of this. Don't thank me yet, Julie replied. There's still the matter of what happens when he comes home from Paris to find the locks changed and divorce. Papers waiting. I thought about Matthew's face when he realized his carefully constructed double life had collapsed. The shock, the indignation, the inevitable attempt to explain it all away. He'll try to convince me it's all a misunderstanding, I said. That's what he does. Rewrites reality until you doubt your own perception. But it won't work this time, I glanced at the email from Brianna again, at the evidence of months, no, a year, of calculated deception. Something hardened inside me, like molten metal cooling into an unbreakable core. When Matthew comes home, I said with quiet certainty, he'll discover I'm not the same woman he left behind. Sleep eluded me that night. The hospital sounds, the steady beep of monitors, the squeak of nurses' shoes in the hallway, the distant ding of the elevator formed a dissonant soundtrack to my racing thoughts. By morning, my eyes felt gritty, my body heavy with exhaustion that had nothing to do with my medical condition. Dr. Patel noticed immediately when she arrived for her morning rounds. Rough night? She asked, checking my vitals with practiced efficiency. You could say that? I replied, attempting a smile that felt more like a grimace. Is it that obvious? I've been doing this long enough to recognize when a patient isn't resting properly. She made a note in my chart. Your recovery depends on adequate sleep, Christina. I can prescribe something mild if you think it would help. I shook my head. I'd rather stay clear-headed right now. There are decisions I need to make. Dr. Patel nodded, her expression understanding but concerned. Just remember that your physical healing comes first. The strongest decisions come from a body that's functioning well. After she left, I reached for my phone, scrolling through emails that had accumulated overnight. The museum board had sent a collective get well message, along with assurances that everything was under control in my absence. Colleagues had forwarded exhibition updates, carefully noting that no response was expected. Friends had sent well wishes, promises of meals and support once I was discharged. All these messages from people who genuinely cared about my well-being, while my husband of 11 years was sipping champagne in Paris with his mistress. A text from Sienna interrupted my bitter reflections. Papers ready. Julie will bring them this afternoon. Call me when you feel up to discussing next steps. I set the phone aside and forced myself to eat the bland hospital breakfast, knowing my body needed fuel even if food was the last thing I wanted. Every bite felt like a conscious choice toward recovery, toward the strength I would need to face what came next. The hospital therapist, Dr. Tanner, arrived mid-morning for our scheduled session. She took the seat beside my bed, her presence calm and grounding. How are you feeling today, Christina? Like I've been hit by a truck, I admitted. And not because of the surgery. She nodded, unsurprised. Emotional trauma often manifests physically. Some researchers believe the pain of betrayal activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. That explains a lot. I shifted, trying to find a comfortable position that didn't pull at my surgical incision. I received an email from his girlfriend yesterday. She thought he was separated. He told her I was at an art retreat in Arizona, not fighting an infection in the hospital. Dr. Tanner's expression remained neutral, though I detected a flicker of something, perhaps anger on my behalf, in her eyes. That's an elaborate deception. How did you respond to this information? I didn't respond to her at all, I said. I forwarded the email to my lawyer and my friend who's helping me. Then I blocked both their numbers and email addresses. That sounds like a protective measure. It is. I know myself. If I engage with either of them right now, I'll say things I might regret, or worse. Let Matthew convince me there's an explanation for all this. You're concerned about being manipulated? I considered this. I'm concerned about my own susceptibility to wanting things to be different than they are. For 11 years, I believed in a version of my husband and my marriage that apparently never existed. That's a difficult reality to accept. Dr. Tanner leaned forward slightly. Christina, from what you've shared, you aren't someone who ignores reality. You've taken concrete steps to protect yourself financially and legally. You've sought support from friends and professionals. These aren't the actions of someone in denial. Maybe now, I conceded. But I was oblivious for months, probably years. Or, perhaps you were extending trust to someone who had earned it initially, then exploited it. There's a difference between denial and betrayal. One is a choice you make, the other is something done to you. Her words settled over me like a blanket. Not removing the pain, but somehow making it more bearable. We spent the remainder of the session discussing coping strategies for the days ahead, particularly for my imminent hospital discharge and eventual confrontation with Matthew. Julie arrived that afternoon, a manila envelope tucked under her arm, and a determined set to her jaw. She'd brought lunch from my favorite deli, chicken soup and half a sandwich that she insisted I eat before we discussed anything serious. Hospital food is no way to recover, she declared, arranging the containers on my adjustable tray. Besides, you need your strength. As I ate, Julie filled me in on the developments of the past 24 hours. The court had granted Sienna's emergency petition to freeze our joint assets based on evidence of Matthew's systematic withdrawals. The locks on both our apartment and the vacation home had been changed. Most strikingly, Julie had visited our apartment building's management office and shown them copies of my medical records and evidence of Matthew's absence. The building manager was horrified, Julie reported with grim satisfaction, especially when I explained that Matthew had abandoned you during a life-threatening medical emergency to vacation with another woman. He personally guaranteed that Matthew won't be allowed upstairs without your explicit permission, medical crisis or not. Isn't that excessive? I asked, surprised by the lengths she'd gone to. Julie's expression hardened. The man left you. To die, Christina. He ignored calls from the hospital. He told his girlfriend you were on an art retreat while you were fighting for your life. Excessive would be me hiring someone to follow him around Paris with a sign explaining what he did, which, believe me, I considered. I couldn't help but laugh, the sound rusty from disuse. I almost wish you had. After lunch, Julie placed the manila envelope on my tray. Sienna said to tell you these are straightforward for now, just the initial filing that establishes your intent to divorce on grounds of adultery and abandonment. There will be more detailed financial disclosures to deal with later, but this starts the process. I opened the envelope and skimmed the documents, the legal language a blur of phrases like irreconcilable differences and dissolution of marriage. My gaze caught on my name, then Matthew's, the formal typography rendering our relationship in cold, clinical terms. 11 years reduced to pages of legal jargon. Where do I sign? I asked, reaching for the pen Julie offered. Are you sure you don't want to read through everything first, or wait until you're feeling stronger? I shook my head. I've never been more certain of anything. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I signed my name on the indicated lines, each signature a decisive step away from the life I had known and toward something undefined but necessary. When I finished, Julie returned the documents to the envelope. I'll deliver these to Sienna today. She'll have them served to Matthew when he returns. No, I said, the word sharp and sudden. I want them on the kitchen table when he gets home. No server, no advance warning. Just the divorce papers waiting beside his packed bags. Julie studied my face. You're sure that's what you want? You don't have to be there when he finds them, you know. You could stay with me for a few days after your discharge. I'm not hiding from him, I replied, a newfound steel in my voice. This is my home, my life. I'm not the one who should leave. Later that afternoon, Dr. Patel returned with promising news. My latest blood tests showed the infection was retreating, and if the improvement continued, I could be discharged the following day. Thursday, one day before Matthew's scheduled return from Paris. You'll need to take it easy at home, she cautioned. No lifting anything heavier than 5 pounds, limited stairs, and someone should stay with you for at least the first 48 hours. I'll be there, Julie promised before I could respond. I've already arranged to work remotely through next week. That night, alone in my hospital room, I scrolled through photos on my phone. Images of the life Matthew and I had built together. Vacation snapshots, holiday gatherings, candid moments of apparent happiness. Had it all been a lie? Or had there been genuine love that somehow withered without my noticing? I paused on a photo from 2 years ago. Matthew and me on the terrace of our vacation home, his arm around my waist, both of us smiling into the camera. I tried to recall how I had felt in that moment, whether there had been any indication that the man beside me was capable of such calculated betrayal. Nothing came to mind. No warning, no premonition. Just the simple belief that we were building a life together, brick by brick, year by year. With a decisive swipe, I archived the album, removing it from view without permanently deleting it. Someday, perhaps, I would be ready to look at those photos again, to sift through the genuine moments and the fabricated ones. But not tonight. Tonight, I needed to prepare for whatever came next, for leaving the hospital, for returning to an apartment filled with memories, for the inevitable confrontation with the man who had shattered the foundation of my life. I closed my eyes, finally, surrendering to exhaustion, but not before setting an intention for the days ahead. I would not allow Matthew's betrayal to define me. This was not the end of my story, but rather a painful chapter in a narrative that would continue, with or without him. Thursday morning arrived with a sense of urgency. Today I would leave the hospital and return to a home that no longer felt like mine, though legally it was, more so than it was Matthew's, thanks to Sienna's swift legal maneuvers. Dr. Patel arrived early to review my discharge instructions, medication schedules, wound care procedures, activity restrictions, and follow-up appointments. She handed me a thick folder of information, her expression serious. The most important thing is to prevent reinfection, she emphasized. The surgical site needs to remain clean and dry. Any increase in pain, fever, or unusual drainage needs to be reported immediately. I nodded, dutifully repeating the instructions to demonstrate my understanding. My mind, however, was already racing ahead to the investigation I planned to conduct once I was home. Julie arrived mid-morning with a small suitcase of clothes and toiletries. "Ready for prison break?" she asked, her forced cheerfulness a thin veneer over her concern. "More than ready," I confirmed, accepting her help to change out of the hospital, gown into loose, comfortable clothing that wouldn't irritate my incision. Even this simple act exhausted me, a reminder that my body was still healing even as my mind raced with plans. The ride home passed in a blur of soft spring sunshine and my own reflection in the car window. I looked pale, thinner, with shadows under my eyes that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. The woman returning home was not the same one who had been rushed to the hospital that morning in March. Our apartment building's doorman, Eduardo, greeted me with gentle concern, rushing to help Julie with my small suitcase. "Ms. Christina, we've been so worried. Is there anything you need?" "Anything at all?" "Thank you, Eduardo. I'm just glad to be home." The word home caught in my throat, suddenly feeling foreign. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Julie explained everything. Mr. Matthew won't be allowed up without your permission. I've informed all the staff." I nodded, unsure whether to feel grateful or mortified that the building staff now knew the intimate details of my marital collapse. "Thank you," I managed, before heading to the elevator. The apartment was immaculate. Julie had clearly cleaned in anticipation of my return, but it felt like a stage set, a meticulously arranged diorama of a life that no longer existed. I moved slowly through the rooms, reacquainting myself with the space while Julie prepared tea in the kitchen. "I put his things in the guest room," she called. "Clothes, toiletries, the essentials. The divorce papers are on the kitchen table as requested." I acknowledged this with a murmured thanks, then made my way to Matthew's home office. This was what I had come for. Not rest, not comfort, but answers. The room was exactly as he'd left it. Desk cleared except for his laptop dock, bookshelves arranged by subject and author, awards and credentials displayed on the wall behind his ergonomic chair. The space of a successful, organized man. Or so. It seemed. I sat at his desk, opening drawers one by one. Most contained what you'd expect: office supplies, files, business cards. But the bottom drawer was locked. "Looking for this?" Julie appeared in the doorway, holding up a small silver key. "Found it in his bedside table when I was packing his things." I took it with trembling fingers. "Did you look inside?" She shook her head. "I figured that should be your discovery." The lock turned smoothly. Inside, I found a stack of papers, financial statements from accounts I didn't recognize, a lease agreement for an apartment in Tribeca, receipts from restaurants and hotels. Throughout the city, places Matthew had never mentioned visiting. Beneath these was a small velvet jewelry box. I opened it slowly, revealing a platinum bracelet set with diamonds. The price tag was still attached, $2,500. Not for me. Matthew had always claimed my taste in jewelry was too subtle for pieces like this. "Well," Julie said quietly from behind me, "now we know where some of that money went." I set the box aside and continued searching. The next item made my breath catch: a second passport. Matthew's face, but issued under the name Matthew R. Wilson, rather than his legal name, Matthew R. Wilson Carrington. Beside it lay an application for global entry under the same abbreviated name. He was planning to leave, I murmured, the reality of his betrayal expanding beyond an affair into something more calculated, more complete. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. Julie squeezed my shoulder. "Keep looking." The final item in the drawer was a leather portfolio. Inside, I found documents establishing an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, transferred funds totaling nearly $350,000, far more than the $200,000 Julie had initially discovered, and emails between Matthew and a financial advisor discussing asset protection strategies in high-net-worth divorces. "He's been planning this for over a year," I said, my voice hollow as I showed Julie the earliest dated document from 14 months ago. "Before the affairs, before everything. He was already preparing his exit." "The bastard," Julie whispered, flipping through the papers. "Sienna needs to see all of this immediately." I nodded but continued searching, opening the laptop dock to find a hidden compartment containing a burner phone and a small flash drive. I pocketed both, not yet ready to examine their contents. By the time I finished, I had assembled a damning collection of evidence: financial deception, plans for a new identity, preparations for a life separate from mine. The affair with Brianna seemed almost incidental, just one piece of a larger strategy of deception. "What do you want to do with all this?" Julie asked, gesturing to the items spread across the desk. I gathered everything into a neat pile. "Photograph it, document it, then put it back exactly as we found it. I want him to know I've seen everything, but not until the moment he tries to deny it." As Julie began taking photos, I leaned back in Matthew's chair, a strange calm settling over me. The investigation had yielded more than I anticipated, revealing not just a cheating husband, but a man I had never truly known. "One more thing," I said, reaching for my phone. I need to call Sienna. If Matthew was hiding this much, there's no telling what else we might find. That evening, Sienna arrived at the apartment, briefcase in hand, expression grim. She embraced me carefully, mindful of my still healing incision. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her lawyer's analytical gaze taking in my pallor and the way I moved gingerly to the couch. "I've been better," I admitted, "but I've also survived worse this month alone." Julie had arranged the evidence we'd gathered on the coffee table. Sienna examined each item methodically, occasionally making notes or taking photos with her phone. Her silence as she worked was unnerving, broken only by occasional murmurs of, "interesting," or, "this explains a lot." Finally, she looked up, her professional demeanor momentarily cracking to reveal raw anger. "I've handled hundreds of divorces, Christina, but this level of premeditation is exceptional." "What does it mean for the case?" I asked. "It means Matthew has seriously miscalculated," Sienna replied, a cold smile forming. "Financial concealment of this magnitude is viewed very unfavorably by the courts. The fact that he was doing this, while you were building your career, contributing significantly to household income, and then during a life-threatening medical emergency, judges don't look kindly on that combination." She began organizing the documents into categories, explaining as she worked. "The offshore accounts can be frozen with a court order. The second identity concerns me more. It suggests he may have been planning to disappear once everything was in place." "What about Brianna?" Julie asked from her position by the window. "Does her involvement change anything legally?" "The affair itself is relevant but not central," Sienna explained. "However, if he used marital assets to support this relationship, which these hotel receipts and jewelry purchases suggest, that's considered dissipation of marital assets. In plain terms, he was spending your collective money to conduct his affair." My head was spinning, not just from the information, but from physical exhaustion. Recognizing this, Sienna gathered her notes and stood. "I'm filing additional motions first thing tomorrow morning," she said. "For now, you need to rest. Tomorrow we can discuss strategy for when he returns." After she left, Julie insisted I eat something before taking my evening medications. I managed a few bites of soup before retreating to the guest bedroom. I couldn't face sleeping in the bed I'd shared with Matthew. "You're taking the master bedroom," Julie protested, following me with my medication and a glass of water. I shook my head. "Not tonight. I need neutral territory." Julie didn't argue further, simply helping me arrange pillows to support my healing body before leaving me to rest. But sleep remained elusive as my mind churned through the day's discoveries, around midnight. I remembered the flash drive and burner phone I'd found in Matthew's desk. The phone was password protected, but the flash drive wasn't. I reached for my laptop and inserted it. The contents were devastating in their comprehensiveness. A folder labeled Exit Strategy, containing a detailed timeline for leaving me, financial projections, lists of assets he considered exclusively his, despite their acquisition during our marriage. Another folder, BR, held hundreds of photos of Matthew and Brianna dating back nearly a year. Weekend trips, intimate dinners, casual moments in what I now recognized as the Tribeca apartment. Most shocking was a document titled Narrative, which outlined talking points for explaining our divorce to friends, colleagues, and family. Matthew had scripted detailed explanations that cast me as career-obsessed, emotionally distant, and ultimately uninterested in the relationship. He'd even drafted an email to my parents, expressing deep regret that our marriage had failed, despite his best efforts to save it. The calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. This wasn't just betrayal, it was character assassination, a complete rewriting of our history designed to preserve his reputation while destroying mine. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. There, in the darkness of the guest room, the full extent of Matthew's betrayal finally hit me. Hot tears burned down my cheeks as 11 years of memories transformed into questions. Had any of it been real? Had he ever truly loved me? How long had he been planning his escape? The sobs came then, deep and wrenching, painful against my healing incision. I muffled them with a pillow, not wanting to wake Julie, but she appeared anyway, silently sitting beside me on the bed until the storm passed. "What did you find?" she asked once my breathing steadied. Wordlessly, I showed her the flash drive's contents. Her expression hardened as she scrolled through the documents, particularly the narrative file. That manipulative, gaslighting son of a... "He was going to make everyone believe I drove him away," I interrupted, my voice ragged. "That's why he's been so attentive to my family lately. Why he's been cultivating relationships with my colleagues. He was establishing himself as the wronged party before making his move." Julie closed the laptop with a decisive click. "Well, that plan is thoroughly destroyed now, isn't it? He's the one who abandoned his critically ill wife for a Paris getaway with his mistress. There's no spinning that, Christina, not even with his carefully crafted narrative." She was right, of course, but the discovery had torn open whatever protective numbness I'd managed to maintain. This wasn't just about saving myself or securing what was rightfully mine. It was about defending my very identity against Matthew's attempt to rewrite it. "I need to be ready when he comes home tomorrow," I said, drying my tears with the back of my hand. "Not just with evidence, but with absolute clarity about what happens next." Julie nodded, understanding the shift in my tone. "What do you want to happen next?" I considered the question, looking around the guest room with its neutral colors and impersonal furnishings. A room designed for visitors passing through, not for permanent residents. That's what Matthew had become, a transient presence in a life that would continue without him. "I want him to know that I've seen everything," I said finally. "The accounts, the apartment, the timeline, the narrative. I want him to understand that every lie, every deception, every moment of his double life is exposed. And then I want him gone." "Gone where?" Julie asked pragmatically. "That's his problem to solve," I replied, a new steeliness in my voice. "He spent a year planning his great escape. Let's see how well those plans work when they happen on my timeline, not his." For the first time since discovering Matthew's betrayal, I felt something other than pain or shock. It wasn't quite power, not yet, but it was the certainty that whatever happened next, I would no longer be playing a role in his carefully scripted drama. I would be writing my own story now. Friday morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the guest room blinds I'd forgotten to close. For a disorienting moment, I didn't remember where I was or why I wasn't in my own bedroom. Then reality crashed back. The hospital, Matthew's betrayal, the impending confrontation. My phone showed it was just after 7. According to his itinerary, Matthew's flight from Paris would land at JFK at 4:15 this afternoon. He would likely arrive at the apartment around 6, depending on traffic. Less than 12 hours until I faced the man who had systematically dismantled our marriage while I built my career and then fought for my life. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt strangely calm, almost detached, as though watching events unfold from a distance. This sense of removal wasn't denial or shock. I'd moved beyond both. But something else, something that felt oddly like freedom. I eased myself carefully out of bed, mindful of my healing incision. My body felt weak, but less fragile than yesterday. The pain dulled to a persistent but manageable ache. In the guest bathroom, I studied my reflection. Hollow cheeks, circles under my eyes, complexion pale from weeks indoors. But my gaze was clear, focused in a way it hadn't been in months. Julie was already in the kitchen, coffee brewing, when I emerged. "You should be resting," she scolded, looking up from her laptop. "I've done enough resting," I replied, easing onto a bar stool at the kitchen island. We have a lot to prepare before Matthew arrives. Julie poured coffee into a mug and slid it toward me. Sienna called. She's filed the additional motions regarding the hidden assets. The court expedited them given the circumstances: abandoned spouse, medical emergency, evidence of imminent asset removal. She said to tell you it's a rare win in family court. I nodded, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. What time is she? Coming over? That's the thing, Julie said, hesitating. She suggested it might be better if she's not here for the initial confrontation. Legally speaking, it's cleaner if this first encounter is just between you and Matthew, with me as a witness, if needed. She'll be on standby, ready to come over if things escalate. They won't escalate, I said with certainty that surprised even me. Matthew is many things, but he's not physically aggressive. His weapons are emotional manipulation, gaslighting, and calculated charm. Violence would ruin his carefully constructed image. Julie studied me over the rim of her coffee mug. You sound different today. I feel different. I sipped my coffee, organizing my thoughts. Last night, after seeing everything on that flash drive, I kept asking myself why. Why would he go to such lengths to deceive me? Why not just ask for a divorce if he was unhappy? Because divorce is expensive and messy, Julie supplied. Especially with your combined assets. That's part of it, I acknowledged. But there's something else. Matthew has built his entire identity around being perfect. The perfect husband, the perfect professional, the perfect social animal. Admitting failure in our marriage would shatter that image. So instead of facing reality, he constructed an alternate one where he's still perfect and I'm the villain. Julie nodded slowly. That tracks with the narrative document. Exactly. But here's the thing I realized at about 3 this morning. I continued, feeling the pieces click into place as I spoke. His entire plan was premised on me never discovering the truth until he was ready to reveal it on his terms. He underestimated me. He thought I was too trusting, too busy with my career, too blind to see what was happening. He miscalculated, Julie said, a hint of pride in her voice. Fatally, I agreed. And not just about the affair, about everything. He thought I needed him more than he needed me. He thought my identity was so wrapped up in being his wife that I wouldn't function without him. The realization hit me with surprising force. For years, I had unknowingly ceded pieces of myself to preserve our marriage, adjusting my ambitions, my friendships, even my tastes to accommodate Matthew's preferences. Gradually, imperceptibly, I had become a supporting character in his life rather than the protagonist of my own. I've been rehearsing what I'll say when he walks through that door, I admitted. Preparing arguments, anticipating his excuses, but I realized something. I don't need to say much at all. The evidence speaks for itself. Julie raised an eyebrow. You're not going to confront him? Oh, I'm going to confront him, I clarified. But not with anger or accusations. Those are the weapons he's expecting, the ones he's prepared to counter with his script about my emotional instability or career obsession. So what's your approach? I tapped my fingers thoughtfully against the counter. Clarity, consequence, closure. I'll let him know I've seen everything, explain the consequences of his actions, and make it clear our marriage is over. No drama, no begging, no room for manipulation. Julie's expression was a mixture of admiration and concern. Are you sure you can maintain that composure when he's standing in front of you? This is the man who left you alone in the hospital while vacationing with his girlfriend. I'm not saying it will be easy, I acknowledged. But I've spent the last week cycling through shock, grief, and rage. I'm exhausted by those emotions. What I feel now is resolve. The word settled between us, solid and true. Resolve wasn't a passionate emotion, but a steady one. The determination to see a difficult task through to its end. Julie reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. Whatever approach you take, I'm here. If at any point you want me to Step in or need me to leave you two alone. Just say the word. Thank you, I said, returning the squeeze. For everything. We spent the morning preparing for Matthew's arrival, not with frantic energy but with methodical purpose. I showered carefully, protecting my incision, and dressed in clothes that made me feel strong, not the power suits I wore for work, but simple, elegant pieces that belonged to me, not to the persona of Matthew's wife. Julie arranged the evidence. We'd gathered on the dining table, not everything, but enough to make it immediately clear we'd discovered his deception. The divorce papers sat prominently at the center, a visual anchor for the conversation to come. By afternoon, a strange peace had settled over me. I moved through the apartment touching familiar objects, saying goodbye not to the space, but to the life it had contained. The paintings we'd collected, the furniture we'd chosen together, the photographs depicting moments of supposed happiness, none of it seemed to belong to me anymore. Or perhaps more accurately, I no longer belonged to it. As the clock approached, 6, Julie squeezed my shoulder gently. Are you ready? I nodded, taking my position in the living room, seated in the armchair that faced the entryway. Not standing, not pacing, but calmly waiting, my hands steady in my lap, as ready as I'll ever be. The sound of keys in the lock never came. Of course, his key wouldn't work in the new locks. Instead, there was a puzzled rattling, followed by a knock. The confrontation I had been dreading and preparing for was finally at hand. But as Julie moved to answer the door, I realized something unexpected. I was no longer afraid of what Matthew might say or do. The turning point had come, not in this moment of confrontation, but in the quiet hours of the night when I'd recognized my own worth beyond the marriage he had shattered. The expression on Matthew's face when Julie opened the door was one of brief confusion, followed by practiced charm. He stood in the hallway, tanned from the Paris sun, designer luggage at his feet, looking every bit the successful businessman returning from an important trip. If not for the slight tightening around his eyes, one might never guess he was arriving at a home where he no longer had a key. Julie? This is unexpected. Is everything all right? His gaze moved past her, searching the apartment until it landed on me sitting in the living room. Christina? What's going on? Why are the locks changed? Julie stepped aside wordlessly, allowing him to enter but not touching his luggage. Matthew hesitated, clearly processing the situation, before stepping inside with a forced smile. I must have missed something, he said, his voice carefully calibrated to sound confused but not alarmed. I thought you were in Arizona for that art retreat. The blatant lie, maintained even now, almost made me laugh. Interesting, I replied, my voice steadier than I'd anticipated. The hospital staff thought I was in Arizona too. They were quite confused when they called you about my emergency surgery. His expression flickered, a momentary crack in the facade before he recovered. Surgery? Christina, what are you talking about? I never got any calls from a hospital. I gestured to the dining table where we'd arranged the evidence. Why don't we skip the part where you pretend not to know what's happening? It will save us both time and energy. Matthew's gaze shifted to the table, taking in the documents, the flash drive, the divorce papers prominently displayed. The color drained from his face, but he quickly composed himself, running a hand through his hair. A gesture I once found endearing, but now recognized as one of his tells when preparing to lie. I can explain everything, he began, moving toward me. Stop. The word wasn't loud, but it carried enough authority to halt him mid-step. You don't need to explain. I've seen it all. The offshore accounts, the Tribeca apartment, the carefully crafted narrative about our failing marriage, the timeline for your exit strategy, the photographs with Brianna. His eyes widened at the mention of her name. How did you? She emailed me, I said, watching surprise transition to alarm on his face. Apparently, she didn't know your wife was in the hospital fighting for her life while you were showing her the Eiffel Tower. Matthew sank onto the couch, his carefully constructed world visibly collapsing around him. Christina, it's not what you think? Actually, it's exactly what I think, I replied, maintaining the calm that had settled over me. You've been planning to leave me for over a year. You've systematically hidden assets, established a separate identity, and constructed an elaborate fiction to justify your behavior to friends and family. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping. What I can't figure out is why you didn't just ask for a divorce. Why the elaborate deception? Matthew's expression shifted then, moving through shock and denial into something harder, a glimpse of the calculating man beneath the charming exterior. Would you have made it easy? He asked, a defensive edge creeping into his tone. Ms. Rising, star curator, with all your museum board connections and society friends, you would have taken everything. I would have been entitled to half, I corrected, just as I am now. The difference is that your attempts to hide assets, combined with abandoning me during a medical emergency, have convinced the court to freeze all our accounts pending divorce proceedings. This news hit him visibly. You can't do that. I already have, I replied simply. Sienna filed the motions yesterday. They were granted this morning. Matthews stood abruptly, pacing toward the window before turning back to me. This is a misunderstanding. I never got any calls from the hospital. I would never have left if I'd known you were seriously ill. 3 calls on the first day alone, Julie interjected, holding up my phone. Hospital records confirm they reached your voicemail each time. And let's not forget the text you sent me, I added, claiming you were in an important meeting when you were actually taking selfies at the Eiffel Tower. Matthew's facade crumbled further, desperation replacing the confident demeanor he'd walked in with. I made a mistake, Christina. A terrible mistake. But we can work through this. 11 years of marriage. You can't throw that away over one bad decision. It wasn't one decision, I said quietly. It was hundreds of decisions, made daily over more than a year. Each lie, each hidden transfer, each secret meeting was a choice you made to betray our marriage. I gestured toward the guest room. Julie has packed your essentials. You'll find them in there. The divorce papers are on the table, along with my attorney's contact information. I suggest you find a hotel for tonight and call her in the morning to discuss next steps. Matthew stared at me, seemingly unable to process that I wasn't yelling, wasn't crying, wasn't begging him to reconsider. This measured response clearly wasn't in the script he'd prepared for. You can't just throw me out of my own home, he protested, a hint of the entitled man he truly was beginning to show through. I paid for half of this apartment. Actually, Julie interjected, according to the documents we found, you've been systematically withdrawing your contribution to household expenses for months, redirecting funds to your hidden accounts and the Tribeca apartment. Christina has been covering approximately 70% of expenses since last fall. Matthew's jaw clenched. You went through my private files? He demanded, anger finally overtaking charm. Yes, I admitted without apology. Just as you went through my medical history to create a convincing story about my supposed psychological issues for your narrative document. That stopped him cold. He hadn't expected me to know about that particularly damning piece of evidence, his detailed notes on using my brief therapy during my mother's illness years ago as proof of my instability. That was, he began, then faltered, calculated, I finished for him. Like everything else you've done. But it's over now, Matthew. The game, the deception, the marriage, all of it. For a moment, Matthew looked genuinely lost. A man whose carefully constructed reality had been dismantled piece by piece. Then something hardened in his expression. Resignation, perhaps, or the recognition that he had underestimated me completely. I'll get my things, he said finally, his voice flat. But this isn't over, Christina. You have no idea what you're doing. Actually, I replied, standing carefully with Julie's supportive hand at my elbow. For the first time in years, I know exactly what I'm doing. As Matthew disappeared into the guest room, Julie whispered, "Are you okay?" I nodded, surprised to find it was true. The confrontation I had dreaded for days had come and gone, leaving not devastation in its wake, but a strange, tentative sense of liberation. Matthew emerged minutes later with his luggage and a duffel bag of essentials, his expression now coldly professional. "My lawyer will contact yours," he said stiffly. "I expect access to the apartment to collect the rest of my belongings." "That can be arranged through our attorneys," I replied, matching his tone. "Goodbye, Matthew." He hesitated at the door, perhaps waiting for a last-minute breakdown, a plea for reconciliation, or an angry outburst. Anything that would fit the narrative he'd constructed about me. When none came, he left without another word, the door closing behind him with a definitive click. In the sudden silence of the apartment, I exhaled slowly, feeling weeks of tension begin to dissipate. "He's actually gone," I murmured almost to myself. "You did it," Julie said, equal parts proud and protective. "That was impressive. Are you really okay?" I considered the question carefully. "Not yet," I admitted, "but I will be." The weekend. After Matthew's departure passed in a strange blur of practical tasks and emotional aftershocks. Though I had maintained composure during our confrontation, the reality of what had happened, both the betrayal and my response to it, hit me in unexpected waves. Saturday morning, I woke to the ping of my phone, a text from Brianna. "I don't know if you've spoken to Matthew yet, but I wanted you to know I've ended things with him. What he did to you was unforgivable. I'm truly sorry for my part in it, however unknowing." I stared at the message, unsure how to respond, or if I should respond at all. This woman had been sleeping with my husband for nearly a year, had planned a future with him, had accompanied him to Paris while I was hospitalized. Yet she had also been the one to tell me the truth when she discovered it. After several minutes, I typed a simple reply. "Thank you for letting me know." It wasn't forgiveness, I wasn't ready for that, but it wasn't spite either. Something in me recognized that Brianna, too, had been manipulated by Matthew's elaborate deceptions, albeit in different ways than I had been. Later that morning, Sienna called with an update. "Matthew's attorney reached out," she reported. "They're requesting a meeting next week to discuss settlement terms." "Already?" I asked, surprised by the speed of his response. "It's actually a good sign," Sienna explained. "It suggests he's not planning to drag this out. My guess is he doesn't want the details of his behavior made public, especially the abandonment. During your medical emergency, that kind of thing can damage a reputation in financial circles. So what happens next? We meet, we negotiate, we aim for a clean break," she said matter-of-factly. "Given the evidence we have, I'm confident we can secure a favorable settlement without a lengthy court battle. But, Christina," she added, her tone softening, "there's something you need to consider before we proceed." "What's that?" "How much do you want to punish him?" Sienna asked bluntly. "Legally, we could pursue various avenues. Alienation of affection, claims, civil fraud for the financial deception, possibly even criminal charges for some of the financial maneuvers. We have enough evidence to make his life very difficult for a long time." The question caught me off guard. Until now, I'd been focused on protecting myself, on surviving the immediate crisis. I hadn't really considered the extent to which I could, or should, seek retribution. "I need to think about that," I said finally. After hanging up, I made my way to the living room windows overlooking the park. Spring was in full bloom, the trees vibrant with new leaves, people strolling along the paths, enjoying the sunshine, life continuing, as it always did. "What did Sienna say?" Julie asked, bringing me a cup of tea. I explained the options, watching her expression harden as I outlined the potential legal avenues for punishing Matthew. "He deserves all of it," she said firmly. "After what he did, he should lose everything. Money, reputation, career, all of it." "Maybe," I agreed, still gazing out at the park. "But I'm not sure I want to be the person who makes that happen." Julie looked at me with confusion. "Christina, he left you to die in a hospital while he was in Paris with his mistress. He doesn't deserve mercy." "It's not about what he deserves," I said slowly, the thought forming as I spoke it. "It's about who I want to be going forward. Do I want to spend the next year or more of my life consumed by lawsuits and legal battles? Do I want my professional reputation tied to a scandalous divorce? So you're just going to let him get away with it?" Julie's tone held a note of disbelief. "No," I said firmly. "He's lost this marriage. He's lost his carefully constructed exit plan. He's lost the narrative he wanted to control. The offshore accounts are frozen, the affair is exposed, the deception is documented. His girlfriend has left him. Those are already significant consequences." I turned to face Julie directly. "But I don't need to destroy him completely to move forward with my life. In fact, I think doing so would keep me tied to him in ways I don't want to be." Julie studied me carefully. "This doesn't sound like the angry woman from a few days ago." "I'm still angry," I admitted. "Part of me wants to see him suffer, to make him pay for every lie, every betrayal, every moment I spent alone in that hospital, wondering where he was. But when I imagine actually doing it, devoting months or years to that vengeance, I don't like how it feels." The realization surprised me even as I articulated it. Somewhere in the past few days, beneath the shock and pain, a deeper clarity had emerged. The path forward wasn't about making Matthew pay. It was about reclaiming my own life. "So what will you tell Sienna?" Julie asked. "That I want a fair settlement, not a punitive one," I replied. "I want what's legally mine, protection for my financial future, and a clean break. No prolonged legal battle, no criminal charges unless absolutely necessary to secure what's rightfully mine." Julie shook her head slightly. "You're a better person than I would be in your position." "I'm not sure it's about being better," I countered. "It's about being strategic about where I put my energy. Do I want to spend the next phase of my life consumed by anger and retribution, or do I want to focus on rebuilding something meaningful?" As the words left my mouth, I felt their truth settle deep inside me. This moral choice wasn't about what Matthew deserved, it was about what I deserved. And I deserved a future not defined by his betrayal. Later that afternoon, I called Sienna to share my decision. "I want a fair division of assets, including compensation for the funds he diverted," I told her. "I want financial support during my recovery period, since his abandonment directly impacted my ability to work. I want the apartment and my career contacts protected. But I don't want to pursue criminal charges or additional civil claims unless absolutely necessary." There was a pause on the line. "Are you sure about this?" "I am," I said with quiet certainty. "I need to move forward, not get stuck in an endless battle with him." "You know," Sienna said thoughtfully, "this approach might actually give us a strategic advantage. If Matthew thinks you could pursue those more aggressive options but are choosing not to, he might be more willing to agree to a generous settlement. Quickly?" "That makes sense," I acknowledged. "But that's not why I'm making this choice." "I understand," Sienna assured me. "And for what it's worth, I think it's the right call. I've seen too many clients lose years of their lives to vindictive divorce proceedings. It rarely brings the satisfaction they hope for." After hanging up, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. The burden of potential vengeance, of decisions yet unmade about how thoroughly to punish Matthew for his betrayal. In choosing a path focused on my own healing, rather than his destruction, I had taken my first real step away from the marriage and toward whatever came next. It wasn't forgiveness. I wasn't there yet. might never be, but it was liberation of a sort I hadn't anticipated. That night, for the first time since discovering Matthew's betrayal, I slept in my own bedroom, reclaiming the space as mine alone. As I drifted off, I realized that the moral choice I'd made wasn't just about how to handle the divorce. It was about who I wanted to be in the story of my own life. Not a victim seeking revenge, but a survivor moving forward with dignity intact. The consequences of Matthew's actions, and my response to them, began to manifest within days of our confrontation. Monday morning brought a terse email from his attorney requesting a modification to the asset freeze to release funds for his basic living expenses. Sienna responded with calculated precision, agreeing to a modest weekly allowance that barely covered a budget hotel room and basic necessities, a far cry from the luxury lifestyle Matthew was accustomed to. By Wednesday, word had begun to spread through our social circle, my phone filled with messages from concerned friends and acquaintances, their tones ranging from genuinely supportive to transparently curious. The story had taken on a life of its own, with Matthew's abandonment during my medical emergency forming the central damning narrative. "Charlotte Bennett called me," Julie reported, returning from a coffee run with barely concealed satisfaction. Apparently, Matthew showed up at the Andersons' dinner party last weekend and was giving some convoluted explanation about our misunderstanding until Robert asked him point-blank about leaving you in the hospital. The room went silent. He left early. I absorbed this information with surprising detachment. The public humiliation that Matthew was experiencing felt less like victory and more like the natural consequence of his own choices. "Has he tried to contact you directly?" Julie asked, setting a latte in front of me. "Just one text," I replied. "We need to talk. This has gotten out of hand." I didn't respond. What had gotten out of hand, I suspected, wasn't the divorce itself, but the fact that Matthew had lost control of the narrative. Instead of my supposed career obsession and emotional distance driving him away, the story circulating through our social and professional circles was one of his callous abandonment and systematic deception. No carefully crafted explanation could compete with the stark reality that he had been in Paris with another woman while I fought a life-threatening infection. On Thursday, an unexpected visitor arrived at our apartment. Gary, Matthew's business partner, looking uncomfortable in the lobby as Eduardo called up for permission to admit him. "I can send him away," Julie offered, hand poised over the intercom. "No, it's fine," I decided. "I want to hear what he has to say." Gary's discomfort only increased as he entered the apartment, his gaze darting around as though expecting Matthew to materialize. "Christina, we haven't had a chance to speak since everything." "No, we haven't," I agreed, gesturing for him to sit. "What can I do for you, Gary?" He perched on the edge of the couch, hands clasped between his knees. "I want you to know that we, the firm, had no knowledge of Matthew's actions. The Paris trip was logged as personal leave, not business." "I appreciate that clarification," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Gary hesitated, then continued, "There are also some concerns about certain financial irregularities we've discovered since this all came to light. Nothing definitive yet, but enough that we've initiated an internal audit." So Matthew's deception had extended to his professional life as well. I wasn't surprised, merely disappointed at how thoroughly he had corrupted every aspect of his existence. "I see," I said simply. "Is there something specific you need from me?" "No, not at this time," Gary replied, standing to leave. "I just wanted you to know that not everyone was complicit in this, and that—" He paused at the door. "Some consequences are still unfolding." After he left, I sat in silence, processing this new development. Matthew's carefully constructed world wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing entirely. Each deception exposing others in a cascading failure of integrity. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of sadness, not for the end of our marriage or even for Matthew's current predicament, but for the person he might have been if he had chosen honesty over deception, courage over calculation. The consequences he now faced were severe, yes, but they were also just. The natural result of a life built on lies. 3 weeks after Matthew's departure, I returned to work at the museum on a limited schedule. My body was healing steadily, though the emotional wounds remained tender, unpredictably sensitive to certain triggers: a familiar cologne worn by a museum patron, a casual mention of Paris in a colleague's travel anecdote, the wedding rings I no longer wore but hadn't yet decided what to do with. The museum staff welcomed me back with genuine warmth and a remarkable absence of intrusive questions. Only my assistant, Eliza, acknowledged the situation directly, placing a small vase of bright yellow daffodils on my desk with a card that read simply, "New beginnings. Welcome back." Those early days of reconstruction were precarious, a delicate balance between honoring what I had lost and recognizing what I might yet build. Julie had reluctantly returned to her own apartment after my physical recovery no longer required constant supervision, though she still called multiple times daily and appeared without warning if I didn't answer promptly enough. "You don't have to check on me so often," I told her during one such impromptu visit. "I'm not going to fall apart." "I know that," she replied, though the concern in her eyes suggested otherwise. "I just miss our slumber parties and midnight ice cream sessions." I smiled, recognizing the half-truth for what it was: a gentle way of maintaining her protective vigilance without undermining my independence. The divorce proceedings had begun to take on a predictable rhythm. Matthew's initial attempts to challenge the asset freeze had been denied by the court, largely due to the comprehensive evidence of his financial deception. His lawyer had subsequently adopted a more conciliatory approach, suggesting a mediated settlement rather than protracted litigation. "It's a smart move on their part," Sienna explained during our weekly update call. "They recognize that a court battle would only expose more of Matthew's behavior to public scrutiny. The faster this resolves, the better for his reputation. And for my peace of mind," I added, surprising myself with how genuinely I meant it. The prospect of freedom from legal entanglements felt increasingly precious as I began to envision a future beyond divorce. That future remained hazy, a watercolor sketch rather than a detailed blueprint, but certain elements were becoming clearer. I wanted to remain in New York, to continue my work at the museum, to maintain the friendships that had sustained me through crisis. Beyond these anchors, however, I allowed myself the luxury of uncertainty, of not yet knowing what shape my reconstructed life might take. Small changes began to accumulate, each one a brick in the foundation of this new existence. I rearranged the furniture in the apartment, creating a reading nook by the living room windows where Matthew's imposing desk had once dominated. I adopted a rescue cat, a dignified gray tabby named Artemis, who regarded the apartment with the cautious optimism of one who, like me, was adjusting to changed circumstances. I started therapy again, not the crisis counseling of the hospital, but regular sessions with Dr. Tanner, who had agreed to continue seeing me as a private patient. Together, we excavated not just the trauma of Matthew's betrayal, but the subtle erosion of self that had preceded it, how I had gradually accommodated his preferences, minimized my own needs, rationalized behaviors that should have raised red flags. "The goal isn't to blame yourself," Dr. Tanner emphasized during one particularly difficult session. "It's to recognize patterns so you don't repeat them." Perhaps the most significant aspect of this early reconstruction was financial independence. With the court's permission, I opened new accounts in my name only, transferred my portion of our unfrozen joint funds, and began the meticulous process of establishing credit entirely separate from the financial entanglements of marriage. "How does it feel?" Sienna asked when I signed the last of the paperwork establishing my financial autonomy. "To have your name, just your name, on these accounts?" I considered the question, tracing a finger over the freshly printed bank cards. "It feels foundational," I replied finally, "like I'm building something solid that belongs entirely to me." The physical reconstruction of my life, the apartment, the finances, the daily routines, progressed steadily. The emotional rebuilding was less linear, marked by unexpected setbacks and surprising moments of strength. But even on difficult days when memories ambushed me or uncertainty loomed large, I recognized that something essential had shifted. I was no longer waiting to be rescued from the wreckage. I was actively clearing the debris, salvaging what could be saved, and laying the groundwork for whatever I might choose to build next. By the time summer arrived, the transformation had begun to manifest in ways both subtle and profound. My physical appearance reflected the inner changes. I'd cut my hair, adopting a shorter style that Matthew had always discouraged, but that I found liberating in its simplicity. My wardrobe had evolved too, incorporating colors and styles chosen solely for my own pleasure rather than anyone else's approval. "You look different," observed Robert's wife Sienna, not to be confused with my attorney of the same name, when we met for lunch at a rooftop restaurant in July. "Not just the hair, there's something else." I smiled, sipping my iced tea. "I feel different." The divorce had reached its final stages, the settlement negotiations concluding with terms that even my attorney admitted were surprisingly favorable. Matthew, it seemed, had prioritized expedience over financial advantage, a choice that spoke volumes about his desire to escape the public scrutiny his behavior had attracted. "He's taking a position in London," Julie reported after running into a mutual acquaintance at a gallery opening. Apparently, the firm's internal audit turned up enough discrepancies that they offered him a transfer or a resignation. The London office doesn't know the full story yet. This news provoked less emotion than I might have expected even a month earlier. Matthew's geographical distance seemed fitting, a physical manifestation of the emotional space that had grown between the person I had been as his wife and the woman I was becoming on my own. The transformation wasn't just personal but professional. My return to the museum had coincided with the final preparations for the major international exhibition I'd been working on before my emergency surgery. Freed from the subtle undermining that had characterized Matthew's support of my career, I approached the project with renewed confidence and clarity of vision. "The board is impressed with how you've handled everything," my director commented during our weekly meeting. "Not just the exhibition, but the personal situation. You've shown remarkable resilience." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the compliment. Without deflection, another small but significant change. The exhibition has been a helpful focus. Indeed, work had become not just a professional obligation, but a crucial element of my healing process. The museum had always been a space where I felt competent and valued, but now it also represented continuity, a part of my identity that predated Matthew and would outlast our marriage. Perhaps the most profound transformation, however, was happening in my relationship with myself. The woman who had unconsciously accommodated her husband's preferences, who had ignored warning signs to preserve a comfortable fiction, who had gradually ceded pieces of her autonomy in the name of marital harmony. That woman was disappearing, replaced by someone more self-aware, more deliberate in her choices, more attuned to her own needs. Dr. Tanner noted this evolution during one of our sessions. "You're speaking differently about yourself," she observed. "Have you noticed?" I considered her question. "I suppose I'm less apologetic," I ventured, "less concerned about how my choices might be perceived." "That's part of it," she agreed. "But there's also an integration happening, a reconnection with aspects of yourself that were suppressed during your marriage." She was right. Interests I had set aside, friendships I had neglected, dreams I had deferred, all were gradually re-emerging, not as a rejection of my past, but as a reclamation of possibilities that had always been present beneath the compromises of partnership. One Saturday morning, I found myself in a small gallery downtown, drawn by an exhibition of emerging artists that Julie had mentioned. As I moved from piece to piece, I was particularly struck by a series of photographs documenting the renovation of an abandoned building. The transformation from decay to renewal, captured in striking before and after images. "It's about resurrection," the gallery owner explained, noticing my interest. "Finding beauty and purpose in what's been discarded or damaged." I nodded, recognizing in the photographs a visual metaphor for my own experience. The building hadn't been restored to its original state. That would have been impossible and perhaps undesirable. Instead, it had been thoughtfully reimagined, its damaged elements incorporated into a new design that honored its history while creating something entirely fresh. "I'll take it," I decided impulsively, purchasing the central photograph in the series. "It belongs in my home." As the gallery owner wrapped the piece, I realized I had referred to the apartment as my home. Not our apartment, or the place I live, but my home. The simple phrase contained within it the essence of the transformation process, the gradual, sometimes painful, but ultimately liberating shift from defining myself in relation to Matthew to existing wholly as myself. The photograph now hangs in my bedroom, a daily reminder that transformation isn't about erasing what came before, but about creating something meaningful from all of it. The joy and the pain, the love and the betrayal, the endings and the new beginnings. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in early September, a surprisingly anticlimactic conclusion to 11 years of marriage. The documents arrived via courier while I was reviewing installation plans for our winter exhibition. I signed where indicated, watching as the messenger sealed the envelope containing Matthew's official release from our union. "Would you like to take the rest of the day?" my assistant Eliza asked, noting the significance of the moment. "Actually, no," I replied, surprised by the certainty I felt. "I'd rather stay focused on the exhibition." That evening, however, I allowed myself a moment of acknowledgement. Julie arrived with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses, letting herself in with the key I'd given her months earlier. "To freedom," she toasted, raising her glass. "To what comes next," I amended, clinking my glass against hers. What came next, as it turned out, included unexpected gifts. Opportunities and insights that would never have materialized had my marriage remained intact. The first arrived in the form of a job offer from the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, a prestigious institution known for its innovative programming and substantial resources. They specifically mentioned your handling of the international exhibition, my director informed me, a mixture of pride and regret in her voice. "I told them they'd be lucky to have you. Though selfishly, I'm hoping you'll stay." 5 months earlier, I would have dismissed the possibility immediately. My life was in New York, my career path clearly defined, my future predictably mapped alongside Matthew's. Now, unmoored from those certainties, I found myself genuinely considering the opportunity. "I'm not making any decisions yet," I told Julie, over dinner that night. "But the idea of a fresh start in a new city is surprisingly appealing." "Chicago's not Paris, but it has its charms," she quipped, referencing the city that had become a shorthand between us for betrayal. "Seriously, though, I'll support whatever you decide, even if it means you move to the frozen tundra of the Midwest." The job offer sparked a broader reevaluation of what I wanted from the next chapter of my life. Freed from the constraints of compromise, I could ask myself questions that had seemed irrelevant or indulgent during my marriage. Did I want to remain in museum administration or explore more hands-on curatorial work? Was I interested in writing the book on contemporary, female artists that I'd been conceptualizing for years? Did I want to stay in an urban center or consider a smaller community with a different pace? These questions remained open, possibilities rather than pressures, and the freedom to consider them represented perhaps the most unexpected gift of all, the gift of genuine choice. Other gifts emerged in the form of deepened relationships. Friendships that had been peripheral during my marriage moved to the center of my life, revealing connections that had been limited by Matthew's subtle disapproval or my own divided attention. "I never told you this," Julie admitted during a weekend hike in the Hudson Valley, "but Matthew once suggested I was a negative influence on you because I encouraged your workaholism. He implied I was jealous of your marriage because I was single." I stopped mid-stride, genuinely shocked. "When was this?" "About 2 years ago at the benefit for the Children's Museum. You were meeting with some board members, and he pulled me aside for a friendly chat." The revelation was disturbing, but illuminating. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place, explaining tensions I had sensed but never fully understood. Matthew's efforts to isolate me had been more strategic than I had realized, extending beyond our immediate relationship to influence my perception of other connections. Perhaps the most profound, unexpected gift was the reconnection with my own instincts. In the months following Matthew's departure, I gradually recognized how I had learned to doubt my own perceptions, to question my intuitive responses to situations and people. This subtle undermining, what therapists call gaslighting, had eroded my self-trust over years of small dismissals and contradictions. "I think I always knew something was wrong," I confessed to Dr. Tanner during a particularly insightful session. There were moments when I would feel a flash of uncertainty or doubt about something Matthew said or did. But I trained myself to ignore those feelings, to assume I was being paranoid or unreasonable. "And now?" she prompted. "Now I'm learning to listen to those signals again," I replied. "To trust that when something feels wrong, it probably is." This renewed self-trust manifested in both small decisions, ending a date with a charming finance executive when his comments about my career felt oddly familiar, and larger ones, like declining a potentially lucrative collaboration that would have compromised my artistic vision for the winter exhibition. Each choice, each acknowledgement of my own inner knowing, represented new growth sprouting from soil that had once seemed barren. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had also, paradoxically, created space for a kind of flourishing I hadn't known was possible. 1 year after Matthew's departure, my new reality had crystallized into something I could never have imagined during those first devastating days. I had accepted the position in Chicago, a decision that felt both terrifying and exhilarating in its completeness. The apartment in New York, our apartment, then briefly my apartment, had sold for well above asking price, another unexpected benefit of the divorce settlement that had granted me full ownership. "Are you sure about this?" Julie asked as we packed the last of my personal items, her voice catching slightly. "New York won't be the same without you." "I'm sure," I replied, carefully wrapping a small bronze sculpture that had been my first significant art purchase years before I met Matthew. "But you know you have a standing invitation to visit any time. I have a guest room with your name on it." The guest room was one of many features of my new Chicago apartment, a light-filled space overlooking Lake Michigan that I had purchased entirely in my own name, with my own money, reflecting my own taste. No compromises, no deference to someone else's preferences, just a home that was wholly mine. My professional transition had been equally decisive. The Museum of Contemporary Art had welcomed me with enthusiasm, and I had approached the role with a confidence that surprised even me. Within months, I had implemented changes to the exhibition schedule, fostered new relationships with artists and donors, and begun planning an ambitious symposium on resilience in contemporary art, a theme that resonated deeply with my personal experience. "You've brought a fresh perspective that was exactly what we needed," the board chair commented during my 6-month review. "Sometimes an outsider's vision is the catalyst for transformation." The irony wasn't lost on me. My own transformation had indeed required an outside catalyst, though a painful one. Without Matthew's betrayal, I might never have discovered the strength, creativity, and independence that now defined my professional approach. my personal life, had evolved as well, though not in the ways well-meaning friends had sometimes suggested. I had dated occasionally, enjoying the company of interesting men without feeling pressured to establish another partnership. The breakneck rush toward coupling that characterized so many post-divorce narratives felt unnecessary, even unappealing, compared to the rich complexity of the life I was building on my own. People seemed bizarrely concerned about my romantic status, I remarked to Julie during one of our weekly video calls. As though being single at 40 is some kind of tragedy to be remedied as quickly as possible. "Tell me about it," she laughed, raising her wine glass in solidarity. "Though I have to admit, I was worried about you being alone in a new city." "I'm not alone," I pointed out. "I'm independent. There's a difference." And there was. My new reality included a diverse constellation of relationships, colleagues who had become friends, neighbors who invited me to community events, fellow museum professionals who shared my passions, and of course, the enduring connections I maintained with Julie and others from my New York life. The absence of a romantic partner didn't constitute an absence of meaningful connection. Even my relationship with the past had transformed. I could now think of Matthew without the searing pain or cold anger that had characterized those early months. Not with forgiveness, exactly. His actions remained unforgivable in many ways, but with a kind of detached understanding that allowed me to acknowledge both the genuine joys of our early years and the inevitable failure of a relationship built on such uneven ground. This perspective gained additional nuance when I learned, through a mutual acquaintance, that Matthew's London position had ended under unclear circumstances, and he had relocated to Singapore for a fresh start. The information provoked neither satisfaction nor concern, merely a fleeting recognition that his pattern of geographical escapes continued, while I had found a way to move forward without running away. On the anniversary of his departure, I took myself to dinner at an acclaimed restaurant I had been wanting to try. There was a symmetry to the timing that felt appropriate, a reclaiming of the day as a marker of liberation rather than loss. Seated at a table overlooking the Chicago skyline, illuminated against the night sky, I ordered champagne and raised a private toast. Not to Matthew, nor to the pain he had caused, but to the woman who had emerged from that crucible, stronger, clearer, and infinitely more herself than she had been before. The woman who had discovered, in the midst of betrayal and abandonment, not just the capacity to survive, but the courage to thrive. This was my new reality, not a consolation prize for a failed marriage, but a life deliberately chosen, consciously shaped, and genuinely cherished. A life that would never have existed had things unfolded differently. Had I not been in the hospital while my husband took his mistress to Paris? Had I not already changed the locks when he returned? 18 months after my emergency surgery, the Eiffel catalyst that had revealed Matthew's betrayal and ultimately transformed my life. I stood at a podium in the Museum of Contemporary Art's main gallery, addressing a capacity crowd at the opening of Resilience, Rupture, and Renewal in Contemporary Art. The exhibition, my first major curatorial project in Chicago, had already garnered attention from critics and collectors nationwide. Art has always reflected humanity's capacity to endure, to transform pain into meaning, to find beauty amid destruction, I began, looking out at the assembled guests. The works you'll experience tonight share that common thread. They are testaments to the resilience of the creative spirit, the possibility of renewal after devastating rupture. As I spoke, I was conscious of the parallel between the exhibition's theme and my own journey. The artists whose work filled the gallery had each faced profound challenges: illness, displacement, loss, betrayal, and transformed those experiences into powerful creative expressions. Their art wasn't defined by trauma, but neither did it deny the reality of suffering. Instead, it integrated difficult truths into a larger, more complex narrative of human experience. After the formal remarks concluded, I moved through the crowd, engaging with guests and observing their reactions to the carefully curated installations. A woman in her 60s approached, her eyes bright with emotion after viewing a particularly moving video piece. "This exhibition feels so personal," she said, clasping my hand. "Like you really understand what these artists are expressing about survival and transformation." I smiled, acknowledging the insight with a simple, "Thank you." Later that evening, after the last guests had departed and only the staff remained for post-event cleanup, I walked alone through the gallery, taking in the works in the quiet stillness. This moment, standing amid the successful manifestation of my vision in a city and position I would never have chosen had my marriage remained intact, crystallized the wisdom I had been gradually accumulating since that fateful day in the hospital. Pain, I had learned, could be a powerful teacher if you were willing to receive its lessons. The betrayal that had initially seemed like the end of everything meaningful had actually cleared space for new growth, new possibilities, new versions of myself that had been suppressed or neglected during my marriage. This wasn't to suggest that suffering was necessary for growth or that betrayal was somehow beneficial. I would never frame Matthew's actions as a gift, no matter how positive the eventual outcome. But I had come to understand that my response to that betrayal, the choices I made in its aftermath, the strength I discovered within myself, the priorities I clarified, had shaped a life more authentic and fulfilling than the one I had lost. "Great event," said my assistant, interrupting my reflections as she approached with a tablet. "The initial press coverage is already coming in." The Tribune critic called the exhibition a masterful exploration of human resilience in the face of catastrophic disruption. I smiled at the apt description. Sounds about right. In the months and years that followed, I continued to build on the foundation that had emerged from the wreckage of my marriage. My professional reputation grew, bolstered by successful exhibitions and innovative programming that reflected my increasingly confident curatorial voice. My personal life expanded in unexpected directions, new friendships, occasional romances that enriched without defining me, greater involvement in Chicago's vibrant cultural community. Maintained contact with Julie and other close friends from New York, our connections deepening despite the geographical distance. Julie visited regularly, marveling at the life I had created and the person I had become. "You know what amazes me most?" she remarked during one such visit, as we shared wine on my balcony overlooking the lake. "How completely you've moved beyond being Matthew's ex-wife. So many people get stuck in that identity, defined by the relationship that ended rather than by who they're becoming." Her observation resonated with me. I had indeed traversed that difficult terrain, moving from shock and devastation through anger and determination to arrive at a place of genuine autonomy and self-definition. The marriage that had once seemed central to my identity had receded into proper perspective, a chapter in my story, significant but no longer defining. Matthew himself had faded to a peripheral figure, someone I occasionally heard about through mutual acquaintances, but whose choices no longer affected my emotional landscape. The last update, that he had married a young executive at his Singapore firm, registered as simply another life event happening to someone I used to know. What remained, what continued to evolve and deepen, was the wisdom born from the experience, the recognition that security can be illusory, that strength often emerges from our most vulnerable moments, that what feels like an ending may actually be an opening to something more authentic and aligned with our truest selves. This wasn't comfortable wisdom. It had been purchased at considerable cost, but it was mine, hard-won and deeply integrated. It informed not just how I lived, but how I created, how I connected with others, how I navigated uncertainty in all its forms. Standing at the railing as the sun set over Chicago, I reflected on the strange, painful, ultimately liberating journey that had brought me here. Not to a perfect life or a finished state of being, but to an ongoing process of discovery and creation. a life that belonged entirely to me. To unexpected journeys, I said, raising my glass to join Julie's toast. And to the woman who had found the courage to take them, one step at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.